enjoying that.
Yeah, he really did.
Yeah, we'll have a meeting about it later.
You ruined everything. I know.
Got a lot of grievances.
I got to send this email to 3,000 people.
You do.
Okay, so today is 11/11/2020.
I know. I know. So Jason and Jackie and I are very good friends, and at 11/11 try to every day, like 11/11, it's 11/11. So today at 11/11 it blew our minds just a little bit. It was special.
So it was 11/11/11.
It was 11/11 on 11/11.
It's 4/11.
You'll have one more chance.
Yeah, all the clocks in my house are set to 11/11. Like all the
Clocks.
Today goes to 11.
So if you said it, it's 11/11, and then 11 o'clock would be 11, and then you could do 11/11/11. 11? Could you do 4 11s today?
So 11/11, the time today. I don't think you can do 4. You can only do 2. Can we talk about that in the news?
We're already live, by the way.
Oh, great.
Darn it, Ryan.
Yeah. The second is 11/11.
Oh, the second.
Yeah, in 11 seconds.
Oh, I'm
We're
so glad this is
tired.
being recorded.
Oh, seconds. That's right. I forgot.
Seconds.
Oh, I'm so glad I showed up.
Are we really live, Ryan?
Yes,
man.
on YouTube we are live.
This is the 11/11/11 episode.
Hey, can you let me know whenever you've tweeted it so I can retweet it? So immediately whenever I log into Twitter, apparently Dave Kennedy is in amazingly good shape.
Yeah.
And Britney
Working
Spears
out every day.
is.
Yeah.
What do you say about Britney Spears?
She lost her court appeal to remove her father as the conservator for her
That's a shame.
wife.
Free Britney.
Free Britney!
Remember when she shaved her head? Oh,
Wow.
poor girl.
Wow, you just really boiled her entire life down. to
Yeah,
that
right.
moment.
One moment.
She shaved her head.
She was a new mom, and I was like, oh, I see. I get that.
My wife was saying that it's really hard to get those kind of conservatorships, and it's really rare for something like that to happen, actually. I don't know. It seems as if she's possibly being used as somewhat of a cash cow. And my wife, she's a mental health counselor, by the way. So she knows
That's where
yeah. Okay. Sorry. Let me put this into not my wife who just happens to be talking about.
No, dude, it's fine. I spent way more time thinking about this than I should. So carry on.
Anyways, I guess she was saying that the argument against would be that if she can do these shows, like if she has that kind of capacity on her own free will, then that's where the level comes out of him being in control of that. So.
So that's an argument for her to remain under his control?
No, to be removed, right? If she can do these shows, right, and not have episodes, then he's not actually providing any real conservatorship. He's not providing that.
Then how the hell haven't they removed it? Or is it just the fact that he controls the millions of dollars and that's the way?
Yes, that could be it, right? Especially when it comes to funding this, right? Because she doesn't have any control. She can't really go hire a lawyer with her own money to do this, right? So it's kind of wild.
Bad.
Yeah,
so bad. You know it's garbage. So free Britney.
Free Britney.
Free Britney.
Free Britney.
All right, well, that was a great show, everybody.
That was good.
That's what they were waiting for. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, please.
No.
All right, everybody. I think that this is all we have for the show today, and we've a short one. We appreciate you all coming, and we're done. Whose idea was it to do this? Anyway, I blame Jason. So I'm going to start with this news story here today, and I don't know quite how I feel about this. There's a bunch of weird things going on in this, but it talks about how Zscaler has been watching the amount of attacks that have been using TLS SSL. So for those of you that don't know, TLS SSL is the way your web browser transmits data with websites encrypted, so people can't see what's actually there. And if the attackers are using this encryption, then it makes it harder for people to actually see the attacks. So what's the question?
So like when I go to a website and it says this is an unsecure site, does that mean it's not using the TLS?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, it can mean one of two things. Either the website your browser is set up that if it's sent unencrypted, it lets you know, or it could also have an invalid certificate, which means that they just haven't paid their bills for their encryption certificates is what that means. But the reason why this article kind of like hit me as weird is it started out by talking about how attackers are using like legitimate encrypted services, things like Dropbox and Box.com, Google, AWS, to actually deliver their malware. Which, Ralph, as you know, this is bread and butter. This is what we do, right? This is what we do all the time. That doesn't surprise me. But down at the bottom, the president of Zscaler basically said that the problem is encryption. How encryption is the issue, and there's lurking dangers of encryption in your environment. And that kind of makes my skin crawl. Ralph, I don't know what you think about that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, blaming encryption for not being able to catch. If we could just get rid of encryption, we'd be able to catch all the bad guys, right?
That's it. Then they couldn't encrypt within the unencrypted data because that'd be encrypting inside of unencrypted. And we all know that that's not possible.
Literally impossible.
Yep, and I think it gets to a bigger issue of privacy. I mean, aside from just tech geek nerd stuff, this encryption thing can be used to protect us, but it can also be used to attack us. And there's been numerous pushes over the years by governments to basically try to get the keys to encryption so that they can decrypt anything, of course, for law enforcement purposes. And I'd like to get like Jason and Deb and Ryan, kind of what your thoughts are. Like, do you want a government that can decrypt everything to catch bad people? Or do you kind of like having some privacy whenever you're going through Instagram photos?
I remember that. So we got Darren jumping in. I remember when they talked about like if there's a back. Who's got the?
I think Darren has his microphone and his speakers on at the same time.
All right. I'm gonna
Hey, Darren.
That's a rookie move.
All right. There we go.
I muted him.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay.
So there's that whole thing of like, if there's a backdoor, then that's okay. But if there's a backdoor, then anyone can access the backdoor. So any backdoor is bad. Like, not just the good people can access the backdoor, but the bad people can access the backdoor. So who's good? Like, it goes back to that: who's good? Is the government good? Is who's good? Are the people who run it good? Like, who's good?
Yeah, and who can actually tell that? One of the things I always kind of closed out SANS conferences for the longest time is if we start handing that level of control over to the government. And I'm not necessarily talking about the government now, even though there's a bunch of idiots that are walking around saying civil war seems like a good idea right now. Once again, moron. But I worry about any government that gets that level of control, not necessarily for today's political climate, as terrifying as it is, but if you flash forward about 15, 20, 30, 40 years, you don't know what type of government you're going to get in. You don't know what they're going to do with that. And I think that level of control is just ultimately dangerous. And I think it's problematic when people that are quote unquote experts in the industry start saying, well, the problem is it's a lurking danger of encryption in your network, because C-Os are going to see this and be like, they're going to call up security people and say, hey, we need to get rid of this encryption because it's bad.
We're just on the first level too of encryption, right? So you can encrypt. Most of the encryption that we do nowadays is all in transit as opposed to at rest. Okay. So a lot of the sites you're visiting, you're encrypting the data between you and the other side, right? But that data on the other side, when it gets there, it's living most of the times in an unencrypted format. So, when you're using the Dropbox and all the other stuff, and it's wild. I mean, we're just starting to move to that second phase where end-to-end encrypted chat applications or whatever, they're encrypting that between both devices. So literally no one in the middle can see that. And we're just starting to make that slow movement over as far as encryption goes too. So, if they think it's bad now, wait till that happens, right? So now all the evidence is encrypted in a way that you're not going to be able to just pull it off a system and read it. So,
but it also gets into other freedom questions. Like we've all heard the horror stories at hacker conferences where someone says the TSA made me log into and unlock my computer. That's never happened to me, and I'm not questioning whether or not that has happened to people, but that's a terrifying thing. I mean, we do have that, that, what do they call it? The Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination. And the idea of trying to force somebody to basically decrypt their data is somewhat horrifying, right? So I see that Derek showed up too. Yeah, go ahead.
One of my favorite moments, like being in the information security community, was I got a chance to teach Girl Scouts the Caesar cipher, and I got to teach them like encryption and like the basics of encryption. And what happened is like these Girl Scouts were like, "This is amazing! Like all of a sudden we can start encoding. We got codes." And the parents who were just nearby were like, "What are you doing?
What are you teaching my daughter?"
Yeah. So the kids
never be able to read this.
Yeah, and so they're like, "Oh, so if I shift this, and I got like a Caesar cipher 7, and then if I know my other person has it's off by 7," and so they were excited about that, but parents did not. And so that reminds me of the government.
You should have taught them Nushu. Nushu was actually a secret form of encrypted communication in women in ancient China. So that you can really kick it up a few notches.
One-time pad. There you go.
Yep.
That'd be the end game right there.
What are the Girl Scouts doing? No one knows.
No one knows. We can't read their messages.
Yeah, I had a group of kids that were over for a school group at our house, and I was teaching the kids how to pick locks because I had a bunch of lock picks. And my kids were picking locks, and they're like, "Can you teach our friends how to pick locks?" I'm like, "Sure." And I'm sitting here teaching all these kids to pick locks, and parents came in and they're like, "What are you teaching our kids?" I'm like, "Crime."
Crime pays, I guess. Teaching my youngest to pick locks, and then I realized this is probably a terrible idea.
This will end poorly for everyone involved. So no, I think that this whole entire issue isn't resolved, right? I mean, we're going to continue to fight this balance between privacy and security, and honestly, it's weird how historically we have people that demand privacy, and then the same people demand security. One of the examples, if you remember, we had a shooting that was in California a long time ago, and the shooters were communicating with each other over Facebook, and everybody was like, "How come Facebook? And how come we aren't watching the communications?" And just like the week before, the news was Edward Snowden talks about how the United States is intercepting all these communications, and people are like, "Well, the outrage! How dare they intercept my communication?" You can't have both, folks.
Yeah,
you're going to have a certain level of risk that you have to accept.
There's already been a lot of proposed laws and stuff about backdoor stuff for governments, but the argument there was always, once it exists, it goes back to that. I got to switch and talk at the same time. It goes back to where you can't unpee in the pool. So once you create a backdoor, there's a backdoor. If somebody gets a hold of that who shouldn't get a hold of that.
Let's say tomorrow, because Apple was the one that were during one of the shootings, or maybe even more than one, where they refused to break into the phone for the FBI.
Yeah.
And so let's just say, John, Ralph, what do you think? Let's say tomorrow that Apple said, "Okay, we're going to create a backdoor for the government to get in the phone." What do you think the time frame would be until some hacker somewhere actually found out what they did and let it go public?
So 37 and a half hours.
3 days. 37 and a half hours. Yeah.
Is this like The Price is Right? Like
$1.
Can't go over.
$1.
What is it? Apple exploits are going down in price, speaking of that, because of how valuable they were, that everyone shifted all of their focus to that, and they've come up with so many that the prices had to drop down. This according to, or was it Rhodium or whoever else is paying,
But that's how it goes, right? Like you look at, like, we go back to Adobe. Adobe had a bunch of vulnerabilities, and if you remember, it was like this tight cluster of a ton of different Adobe Acrobat vulnerabilities. From like U3D, flat date decode, all those different things that were inside of PDFs. And then we had Java vulnerabilities, and everyone was like, "Java's secure. We don't have to worry about security issues in Java." And for years, people believed that. but it seems like it's just like, where does the pen test, like reverse engineering and exploit dev community focus? And then they hear about a new vulnerability in something and they all pivot to that thing for a certain period of time. So I think that makes sense. Like once you have those vulnerabilities, everyone starts focusing on those vulnerabilities.
Well, I feel like, that's almost like there's going to be no vaccine for anything but the coronavirus.
Yeah.
Everyone to stop. Like if you get anything besides the coronavirus, you are just...
You're dead. That's it.
Wow. I mean, you're right. All the facilities are just be pumping that out,
What do you mean I'm going to die of dysentery? What the hell? You don't have to fix? Sorry, dude. If you had the Rona, we'd have you.
Got you covered.
Yeah.
What kind of parties are you hanging out at? All right. So the next news story, this isn't new. We see this happen all the time. Millions of hotel guests worldwide information is caught up in a data leak. Now, before I actually scroll down and basically reveal how millions of hotel guests worldwide caught up in a mass data leak. So how do you all think that this data was leaked? Like, how do you think that this tremendous, I think it's like 37 gigs of data was leaked online? If you had to guess.
S3 bucket.
Oh my God, nailed it in one.
I was going to say an open Wi-Fi port.
I couldn't unmute and say the same thing before Ralph. I had
I did not read this article. That was literally a guess.
Wi-Fi. That's interesting, right? Because I don't know the situation, right? But if you set up an S3 bucket now, don't you have to go through quite a few clicks to actually screw it up?
Yeah, default is that it's
This one was screwed up for a while, apparently, but I still thought that, so I have intentionally screwed up S3 buckets, and Amazon sends me like an email a day, and it's like, hey, you got a bad S3 bucket. And then it comes in sometimes and it says, just so you know, we've locked your account out because you're dumb. You're going to have to log in and actually enable this insecurity to make this happen. So I think you're right. It almost appears that somebody intentionally logged in, went through all the warnings and clicked, no, I'm a moron, and allowed it to run. So.
This just runs down right to it needs to work, and that's how we're going to get it to work. So instead of figuring out what the problem was, they kept being like, well, I'll just keep turning off stuff. Oh, now it's working. Perfect.
So wait, is this the new vendor you need to be DA for this product to run kind of thing? For our app to run to
this is the new. Yeah, this is the new local administrator problem, where it's like, oh, well, in order to run this particular app, you have to have completely insecure S3 buckets for it to run. Why? Because the developers would just think it would make it easier. Hey, Rob, we're talking about insecure S3 buckets still being a thing. And maybe I'm pretty sure that if you have an S3 bucket that's open, you get a few emails, and then they actually lock it out completely. You have to log in and then unsecure it, and they go through tons of warnings to make that happen. At least that's what I thought it was the last time I went and tried to deal with my S3 buckets.
Yeah, so by default nowadays, it's definitely a default closed unless you open it up. And yes, there are a bunch of checkboxes and other things. However, on the API, all you have to do is accept warnings, and it creates the open public S3 bucket. So it's not a ton that you have to go through to make that happen.
So let me ask a question. Let's just assume that you were a legacy customer that, back when you would set it up and you had to click buttons to make it secure. Like, what would happen if it was insecure for just that long? Would Amazon be sending you emails going, hey, this thing is insecure?
I'm going to see if I can find an email here real quick. So go ahead and answer that.
Well, I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so. I know you can just... So, by the way, just for context, there is legitimate reasons to make a public S3 bucket. So, before we think about this just being some closed off item, that there are literal good,
Absolutely.
Situations, right? But the problem is that obviously they're not applying that, right? They're just using some app and making it open. Right?
Yeah, I actually did a mobile app test here recently where there was a public S3 bucket, and they were storing some stuff that and with GUIDs, and it wasn't personal information. It was just images from the app, and I thought it was kind of a risk maybe, but when if you're going to randomly guess a UUID, I think it would take you until the heat death of the universe to do it. But I think I did actually put the calc. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. I looked up the math to how long it would take for me to just go through brute force all of them, and it wasn't doable. But you're right. Like there are times when a developer, when it's appropriate that you could do it.
Yeah, public content.
You can host your own website completely out of S3.
Yeah.
And make it so that you don't care about DDoS or hacking it at all ever. One of the scare, I don't know because I came in late, I don't know the news story on this, but one of the scarier pieces is and I think Chris Gates has talked about this pretty openly as well, is the setting in S3 where you can say authenticated users are allowed to this S3 bucket, and that just means anyone with an Amazon account, not inside your organization. And a lot of organizations have set their S3 buckets to that, so thinking that it's just their organization that has access to it. And I know there's a couple DEF CON talks on this where people have authenticated to Amazon and then did S3 scanning and found a bunch of stuff too.
I did not know that. That's going to change my scanning, I think.
So my question to you all is this incompetence? Is this neglect? Is this a lack of project management? Like, what is the thing that causes this kind of issue?
Yes.
Yes, all of that.
Yeah, all of that.
That causes an S3 bucket to be open?
To be unsecure, to be...
So I would,
or data
I
breach to happen.
When I was joking about the the new local administrator or domain administrator to run the app thing, I really wasn't joking. I was an administrator years ago, in a different lifetime, and I remember reading a vendor saying you need to make the service account a domain administrator, and me thinking the hell I do. No. But that was the reason they do that is because it cuts down on their support. And then, you have some overworked systems administrator who has pressure from operations and their supervisor to get something done. So he's basically like, screw it, I'm going to do this. And is it neglect? No, it's keep getting your job done.
But if you're looking at it, may not be, keeping your job done for like that individual. But I think if you abstract it to the organization, it is neglect, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And they may be forcing that administrator to do that. But, eventually there has to be some responsibility for the organizations that are doing these types of things.
If we also step back too and look at what S3 buckets are used for, a lot of applications are utilizing S3 to store data programmatically. So not necessarily somebody, that wrote the application. You could be buying this from a third party and needing this S3 bucket to store data. You didn't write this, but when you configured it, you just turned it on to public and didn't realize, And so there's a lot of that going on too, I think, more than just somebody necessarily going there, set it up. And in those processes, there could be infrastructure as code that adds that S3 bucket, but configures it wrong as well. So it's not maybe always a human.
But that also gets to some of the other vulnerabilities that we've discovered, specifically Jordan had found in like some Hue interfaces, where whenever you configure your Amazon services, you may configure it secure, but then when it starts scaling and it starts bringing up additional services to handle the additional load, it doesn't necessarily pull the security configuration settings as it scales up. So when you're testing, it's not just an issue of testing it when it's not in production, but you need to test it when it's under a load too. Because as you scale up the different services, then those insecurities can actually pop up and then disappear as those services start scaling back down. So it is kind of a complicated little problem that you're dealing with when you're trying to test it.
So to answer your question, Jason, it's super hard to not mess this up, right? So what organizations need to do is have a constant monitoring of public S3 buckets and have alerting on that through CloudWatch or other alerting setups. That way the security team can get a message anytime there's a new public S3 bucket under their organization.
It almost sounds like that you're saying that organizations need to realize that their cloud infrastructure is just as important as their internal infrastructure, and they should have an inventory of those kinds of things.
They know that. There's no organization that doesn't know that cloud is just as important as their.
Oh yeah, I don't know. There might be a couple. I think some tests I've been on with what I found in Azure would, imply different.
They might not treat it as important, but they know it is important.
But I would agree with both of you. And I hate to be like the parent. You're both right. But you're both right in the respect that if you sat down and you said your cloud infrastructure is important, they're going to be like, yeah, all right. Where's your cloud infrastructure? It's like, oh, okay. It's Amazon, right? I think that there's a difference between understanding that, this is an important thing, but then also grokking and getting your head around all the different components, the accesses, the API access, the unauthenticated versus authenticated access, and all those different vulnerabilities exist. And I really don't blame organizations that have a lot of cloud security vulnerabilities, this one aside. But a lot of organizations, whenever we find these security vulnerabilities, they're like, I didn't even know that was a thing. And sometimes we're surprised it's a thing. Like, you remember a test that Mike and Bo was on last year or 2 years ago, where if you got valid credentials to Azure, you could just start spawning off additional user accounts without actually being an administrator. You could just start adding stuff to it. That's weird, right? So I think that everyone understands, look, this is important, but I don't think that they quite understand. I don't think hardly anybody in the industry really understands the extent of what that actually means, because everything's changing constantly.
You get one of these cloud accounts and you get 5,000 services, and only 3 of them do you use, but you can turn all those things on, but you're not an expert at all those services. So, I mean, it's difficult to say I secured all those.
But as an administrator, you tend just to turn all that crap on. You're like, I don't want crap to break. Yeah. Sure. No?
Also, I hate to get on this topic, but it's apropos. But the problem also is that there's 500 tools to find random S3 buckets that are open on the internet. When I worked at a previous company, spent a lot of time trying to find open source tools that would say, give me an API key and then tell me what S3 buckets are available that are public. I had to write it myself. So there's very little defensive tooling when it comes to cloud-based infrastructure out there for enterprises to use to get better at this. They mostly rely on experts inside their organization, and experts are hard to come by.
I thought the cloud was secure already.
By default.
It's in there.
And you see some vendors like Microsoft is trying, right? Like, I can't remember what it is. It's something that they're rolling out now to customers that is like kind of like MBSA, Microsoft Security Baseline Analyzer for cloud, where you can go into your Azure infrastructure. It'll test all of your security settings and say, hey, these are best practices. These aren't. It's like beta. Maybe it's out of it now, but it was beta a couple of weeks ago. That's just now hitting. I mean, it's not like, Microsoft hasn't been doing the cloud for a couple of years now, but just now they're starting to release that type of defensive tooling that you're talking about, Rob.
Yeah, while I am an offense guy, it's really unfortunate that there are a lack of public sharing of defensive tools. Even getting baselines ready.
Yeah. Well, that's because those are called security software companies that sell X, right? So
yeah.
I mean, it's regrettably to your point.
That's a great way of thinking about it. I hadn't even thought about that angle on it.
You know what's horrible about that, though, Rob? Is a lot of these vendors that are releasing these tools that supposedly go through and audit your cloud infrastructure on the fly. Like, we do a lot of tests. It doesn't seem to get in the way. It's almost like, whenever you're talking about what you're looking for and what you're trying to do, there should have been a freaking vendor that was doing that. But it's almost like they're occupying 2 separate rooms, the offensive and the defensive community. And like the defensive stuff that they're trying to put in place doesn't actually correlate to what offensive people are actually doing.
Yeah, but that's 2 different horses running the different races. Like, that is really hard to sync up.
Yeah.
You have to have someone who's an expert in both, or to be able to even get there. And like getting experts in one is still a diamond, a diamond in the rough. Like getting one in both is hard.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. It absolutely is. But that's the way it is with anything as far as a new technology that's coming out. You're always going to have that disparity between what the two rooms are actually doing. Yeah. And the forensics people haven't even really started showing up to the party yet, so they'll be here. Hide the beer.
Can I offer up a topic that I'd love input on, or are we still doing news?
No, please. Topics are good.
So I have been thinking about this for a long time, and I'm trying to figure out. If you're a lawyer, or if you want to become a lawyer, you have to go to. You are required by law in almost every state to go to law school and pass the bar. Mm-hmm. To become a doctor, you have to go to medical school and pass some kind of other test. I forget what it's called. And you have residencies. These are critical, life-changing jobs in the U.S., right? Like you can screw with someone's life and livelihood if you mess it up, if you are not good at being a lawyer or not good at being a doctor, right? Do you think that we are getting to the point in cybersecurity where we need to start saying that at some level, I wouldn't say entry level because that's kind of like paralegals or nurses and stuff. I'm not saying nurses are low value or paralegals are low value, just to say, but I am saying that they aren't through their doctorate or their law degree.
Yeah, but dude, even nurses have to go through testing though too. Sure, right?
Yeah. Yep. I was just clarifying that I didn't get hate mail saying that
we get
looking down on. So
you have to have a license to be an electrician or a plumber or cut hair.
But licenses
they're
can
more
be like
expensive.
certs. But licenses can be like certificates or like certs and OSCE and stuff like that. What I'm saying is, what do you guys think? What do y'all think? Everyone on the call, on if it's possible, one. And do you think it's likely to, and do you think it's a good idea to make a certain level of security, like a CISO or a director level, be required to go through some sort of schooling to have the responsibility and ultimately liability of security? Because it's getting to the point where it is affecting people's lives in negative ways these days.
Well, the DoD already kind of does this, right?
8570.
Right. So
that's a certificate level, but
but still, I mean, it's not trivial to get some like some of the higher level certs, right? Like, I mean, it's not. Sure. I mean, anybody can do it for sure. It's not passing the bar exam or going to medical school, right? But I would argue that it doesn't really have to be.
Really?
I think. Well, no. I mean, I don't feel like I'm as smart as a doctor or a lawyer. Like I feel like I was smarter, maybe I would have done that. I don't know.
But I think you are as smart as someone in your field as someone in their field. I do.
Oh, well, thanks.
That's nice.
So, what I'm saying is, I do personally. I'm getting to the point where I'm thinking that this is something that we need to put in place, where the liability of security, and that, because right now the worst that can happen is if you're a CISO, you get the golden parachute, right? There has to be some.
That's brutal.
Right?
That's
the worst that can happen.
But
right. So I think that we need to starting to put liability into security so that people take it seriously. Because I think that people take it seriously abstractly, but don't take it seriously personally. Like, I don't worry that if I do security badly, I'm going to go to jail.
So I think the analogy holds whenever you're talking about the level of risk that an individual kind of takes on. We joke about being pen testers, but every one of us is worried every time we do a test, or anytime you all do a test. But I worry about a network going down, right? A service crashing, right? We're constantly in fear of that. But if we look at these two things, right? If we look at the examples, let's take medical as an example. Let's look at engineering, structural engineering as an example. If you look at a lot of these different fields, and nursing would apply too, the concept of a common body of knowledge is easier than it is in computer security. Not that that a human body is less complicated than IT infrastructures, but it is a known and quantified quantity. So like whenever you're learning about a human body, that's not going to change 3 years from now. The drugs may change, but even they change so incredibly slow because of all the different things that they have to go through, that you can be a doctor and you can be certified in what a doctor should know. And what a doctor should know now and 5 years ago is pretty close to the same thing because you're working on the same specimen. Engineering, structural engineering, same thing. A lot of those formulas, a lot of those designs, a lot of the materials themselves stay consistent. Now you apply that to IT engineering, and I think it's a bigger thing than just security, right? If you look at IT engineering, what we have now versus 5 years ago versus 10 years ago is things are evolving so quickly that it becomes very, very difficult to actually create a certification and say, this is what a pen tester should know, or this is what a CISSP should know. Because
I gotta push back a little bit because like we're still putting the same like the reason why there's a findings database is that we're still putting the same findings in that database, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that there is, to use your analogy, yes, we're still like computers are still a body that changes, and it changes person to person and organization to organization. But I don't think that like Windows is still Windows. It may get better and evolve a little faster than a body would, but like it's general, like the same problems with Windows has been the same problems with Windows forever, right?
But Windows is not cloud computing, and AWS today is not what it was even 3 months ago.
So
and
we need
talking about there.
Right. So we need different types of doctors, right? So someone who's a virologist is very different than someone who's a vet.
Yeah, but a doctor, like you can have a doctor that becomes an eye doctor, or, you can have a doctor that can specialize, right?
Mm-hmm.
But whenever you're talking about not eye doctors, because that's their own specialty, when you're talking about a specific doctor, like if I move on and I deal with oncology, or I deal with a number of different things, I have to get a base medical degree and I have to pass my boards first, and then I can specialize. And in that, I would agree with you, because I think core concepts like TCP/IP, core concepts, like you said, operating systems architectures, I think that a lot of people don't even have those fundamentals.
Oh,
and I would agree with something saying, hey, you've got to be able to understand the TCP/IP three-way handshake at a minimum if you're going to talk security.
CISOs who aren't going to be that technically adept. It's sort of a different skill set, especially in larger organizations, right? And I'm not sure you want all your technical people being CISOs, and I'm not really sure that it's a good idea to hold people personally responsible, because there's a lot of nuance. I mean, there's a lot of things that happen, right? And just because something happened, what if that CISO was overruled by the CEO? I mean, I guess, to some degree, like, if it could be proved someone was negligent, then that company could be held responsible. But I don't know about personally holding people responsible, because I work in organizations where I made recommendations and was told we couldn't do that, and then I got to say, I told you so.
Yeah.
So
I got two things. One, CISO? Really? You say it's CISO?
CISO? It's kind of like SIEM and SIM.
Yeah. And second is, Rob, I think a lot more people would adopt this if there was some kind of grandfather clause where the people who are already doing it don't have to go get the board certified. And then all the new people would be like, oh man, I got to get board certified.
I wish I was old.
Yeah, I think that comes down just for two questions in my mind, kind of past the initial things about what we would do, but how it would look, right? So like right now we have universities and stuff for doctorate and kind of like these established knowledge certification bodies, but we really don't have that right now for our industry. We have certifications, but we don't have like a central respected unifying body to say that you are a this. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So it is kind of like we would be, and I say we, the industry at large would have to create that and agree upon it. And I think getting the momentum is the hardest part in that process.
Well, and I think that momentum's difficult because a lot of the organizations that could actually do that, they're trying to make a profit. Years I've been with the SANS Institute. I love SANS. I love SANS instructors, but it's difficult to actually create a unifying body whenever you have someone like SANS or CEH or Crest who are trying to make money and be that unifying body, not as an inclusion, like an inclusive organization, but one that's actively trying to say, no, we're determining what security professional needs to have, and no one else can say what that
So, but for devil's advocate, is that how the bar and how medical licenses came about? I would imagine that there's probably some kind of legislature, some kind of requirement from the government because something bad happened at some point. I mean, I don't know how it came about, but that would be my guess, is that, to kind of combat malpractice, like, oh, you can't just decide tomorrow I'm going to be a lawyer. I actually have to go get trained.
You actually could before 1870. You could decide that you were a lawyer before 1870. That's when the law school came about.
Whatever.
Well, and even now, you can say you're a lawyer. That's fine. Passing the bar only means that you can defend or represent somebody in front of a judge in a court of law. You can do wills. You can do anything that a lawyer does without a law degree. But as soon as you step foot into that court, you absolutely have to pass the bar at that point.
From this day forward, I am a lawyer.
So I'm actually, now that this topic has come up, I'm really going to start digging into how law school and medical school came to be. Like, it didn't just come out of nowhere, right?
Check out structural engineering. I know that my wife, whenever she actually got her degree, she was given a ring. And that ring represented a bridge somewhere. I can't remember the exact story, but the engineer screwed up that much and it killed people. And it was basically there as a reminder to engineers that you've got to be on your game, and they have to go through like an apprenticeship period before you can actually become a full PE. You've got testing, you got all that. So that'd be another one to look at as well.
Yeah, sort of my point with that is if something really bad were to happen, or maybe a series of bad things to happen, then the government would step in and force that kind of thing, maybe. I mean,
and that scares the hell out of me.
Oh, yeah, me too.
Yeah, that just scares the living hell out of me. If the government comes in and says, all right, we're going to take care of this problem.
They're going to install backdoors, and then they're going to have a bar.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons, boys and girls, why if you're here listening to us, don't screw up. Because if we screw up, that's who's going to come and tell us how to do our jobs.
They won't let Girl Scouts have encryption. That's what
they won't let Girl Scouts have. Jason's going to be a criminal. I like how people are coming into this late and they're like, "What is this about Girl Scouts?"
Yeah, I really like the talks of of criminalizing encryption, because making math illegal sounds awesome.
Well, you remember when AES,
we did it. We did it for a long time in the US.
I'm aware. I'm totally aware.
With AES, they had the entire AES algorithm, and you could wear it outside of the country, and that would technically be a crime. You would be violating export controls.
Yeah, that's a big Supreme Court. I listened to a whole podcast about it.
Oh, cool.
I know Hack 5 has been really, really sensitive about those rules for the products that we develop too.
For who?
Hack 5.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, right? Because you guys are shipping all over the world.
Yeah. And there's some countries that we have a hard time shipping to and are not allowed to because of the type of product it is, and have to jump through hoops and resellers just to make that happen if it's possible, right?
And that's why we sell T-shirts and card games. All right, so let's wrap this up. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. Really appreciate it. Hope people enjoyed the presentation. And let's not do the chittering chipmunks in the end. Let's just kind of gracefully end this.
Yeah, that's so much better.
Yeah, right. How about Happy Veterans Day,
did you really?
Well, thanks again, everybody.